John chapter 11 tonight. A lesson I've entitled Calm Before the Storm. And I like the expression calm before the storm, but I also like an actual calm before a storm. I know you all have, because we're all from pretty much the same places. But how many times in your life have you seen clouds that looked like this? Yeah, I've seen clouds like that many times. And the first time, though, I remember seeing clouds like that, I was 6 or 7 years old, standing outside of the tiny single-wide trailer that I grew up in. And my neighbor was a nice man named Mr. Carter, walked out of his brick home across the street from me and said, "Son, when you see clouds like that," he said, "it usually means that there's a good chance a tornado is about to happen." He said, if you'd like, I have a tornado cellar over here, and you're welcome to it anytime you want." And I spent a good part of my youth in Mr. Carter's tornado cellar. Sometimes it would just be a thunderstorm, and he would come out there and find me sitting in his tornado cellar all alone. But I appreciated it. And this is a neat phenomenon that people on only our part of the world get to see. It's called a shelf cloud, and not the same thing as a wall cloud, which is something else entirely different, but both are, you see something like that, you know that there is a storm coming, and most likely a big one and a bad one. So, but tonight we're going to see a storm coming of a different sort. Previously, Jesus resurrected a man that had been dead for 4 days. That's what we just got through looking at. That man's name is Lazarus. Lives with his sisters, Mary and Martha, a little small town of Bethany, right outside of Jerusalem. We saw a preview in this of what he'll do for himself in around a week. We're only about a week away from the crucifixion, a couple days more in the resurrection. It's also a preview of what he will do for us. We get our hope in our resurrection, not only from the resurrection of Lazarus, but also and especially from the resurrection of Jesus. But some, we saw last week, some put their faith in him, but others put their faith elsewhere. The last verses we looked at, verses 45 and 6, said, "Therefore many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what Jesus had done believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done." Very interesting thing. They didn't go, and John's contrasting those who believed with those who went to the Pharisees. Now, these are all people that witnessed the same miracle. Yet, some refused to believe. Okay, so we'll talk more about that as we go into this. First we have a gathering. As I put these points together, a gathering. Verses 47 and 8 to begin. "Therefore the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council and were saying, 'What are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation.'" First question, first one that came to my mind as I was studying, how does John know what was said in the secret council of the great Sanhedrin?
He was one of them and probably sat in on a lot of meetings just like that.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily John. Yeah. That's okay. I was trying to figure out where Dave was going with that.
Probably had some informer though.
Yeah. we learn in like, say, Acts chapter 15, for instance. I'm not going to read Acts chapter 15 to you, but in Acts chapter 15, we read about, that's when they're having the squabble about whether or not they should circumcise all the new converts. And surprise, surprise, who are the people in Acts chapter 15 who say, nope, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We still have to circumcise them. It won't surprise you if you go back and read Acts chapter 15 that the people that were raising the big stink were the Pharisees. Now, these weren't Pharisees that we're reading about, non-believing Pharisees. These were the Pharisees that became Christians. It's hard to stop being a Pharisee even after you become a Christian. So, as Paul himself, had a time figuring out. But chances are that some of those people some of those Pharisees and some that were on that council who had become Christians told John exactly what was said, exactly what happened in that meeting after the raising of Lazarus. And what a neat way to get information, as that the apostles could have got inside information, hearing from people who used to deny Jesus but now follow Jesus. Here are the things that I think John got a lot of his information like that. Anyway, that was just the first thought that I had. So I thought, wait a minute, this is a secret meeting of the great Sanhedrin. How on earth does John know this information? So I did some reading, and other people had concluded the same things I did, which to me makes me think, okay, either we're all crazy or we're all right. So probably somewhere in between. Within these verses is one of the great apologetics in Christianity. Apologetics just meaning a word for explaining to people, why the Bible is good and reliable. They acknowledge his miracles. Notice this, you're not going to see this in any of the Gospels. Nobody says that his miracles are fake. Nobody calls Jesus a phony. His miracles were so good, they were so undeniable, that they couldn't use that. Believe me, they would have if they could have. You hear people today calling religious people phonies, because of the things that they claim. And everyone that I've ever seen called a phony has never proven that they weren't a phony, except for Jesus. And no one called Jesus a phony, though. His miracles were too in your face. They had too many eyewitnesses. There were too many people that said, no, this happened. And especially with the raising of Lazarus, the multitude of witnesses that were around and saw exactly what had happened. People that were there at his funeral, people that were there at his burial, people that were there at his resurrection days later. So what a sight. But unbelief, as we've been talking about this on Sunday mornings a lot, unbelief always has a sinister motive. Always. Remember, I put a note there, remember Huxley. Now I read a big thing from Aldous Huxley, one of the big atheists of the last century, from England. For I myself, he said, as no doubt for most of my contemporaries, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. We said that, they basically said that there's no point to life, like everything is meaningless. And what they were doing, they were trying to do away with God. But they were doing so for the point of liberation. We want to be free. Well, free to do what? The liberation we desired was simultaneously liberation from a certain political and economic system. So they saw, he lived at a time where he witnessed the fascism of Italy. He witnessed the Nazis in Germany. He was an eyewitness to those things. But he didn't live under a government like that. He lived in England. So it's funny, a lot of these people that talk about all the injustices of the world, they don't live in the injustices of the world. They live in a place where those things aren't going on. Anyway, from a certain political, so he wanted freedom from certain political and economic systems and liberation from a certain system of morality. Now he goes on to say it, not right here, but he goes on to explain that what he's talking about is Christianity. He's not trying to be free from any other system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. That was the root determining factor for him and many of his cohorts. We have to figure out a way that we can justify doing sexually whatever we want to do. If we have to say that God doesn't exist to do that, so be it. That will be how we get from point A to point B. So what I like about Huxley, and the reason I quote him so much, is he is one of the few honest atheists. One of the ones who said, like, I don't believe in God, but if it means I can't do whatever I want, then I'm not going to believe, no matter what. So at least he's honest about having a sinister motive behind what he wants. If he would have known when he said those things that the preachers were going to be using that as examples, he never would have said them. I guarantee you that. But he's long dead now. John chapter 11, verses 47 and 48 again, back to where we were. So what was the sinister motive of these guys? I said unbelief always has a sinister motive. What was the sinister motive of the Pharisees and chief priests, for that matter? To retain power. I mean, look what they say. Now, the Pharisees, they have different types of power, though. For instance, the Pharisees had influence over the common people. They had influence over the multitudes. And that was, for the most part, that was good enough for them. They weren't they extorted money and things like that as well, but they were in that comfy upper middle class of their time. But the thing that they enjoyed most was their control of the multitude, the control of the people. Now the Sadducees, they had real power as we would describe power. They didn't have power over the multitude, but that didn't matter because they had political power. Now when they were in with Rome, they were friends and allies with Rome. I mean, they had close connections. They were interwoven with the Romans. I mean, so they were politically, they were complete sellouts. They were complete sellouts religiously as well, which is interesting because the high priest was always a Sadducee, never a Pharisee. They controlled the temple, and what happened at the temple, all the money exchange and the sale of animals, they controlled that. They had the monopoly on that entirely. The Sadducees did. They controlled the great Sanhedrin, who was on it, who was not on it. They controlled the money that came into the temple and where that went. They controlled 100% of that. And on top of all that, they were landowners and they were very wealthy. They were the aristocrats of their time. Now, if you go back and read in the Old Testament, the qualifications for priest and the high priest, you're not going to find anything that looks anything like these guys on any level. So, they didn't want to lose that power, though. So, look, the nation, look what I said, they will take both our place, so that's their place of position. They didn't want to lose that. They didn't want to lose their power of influence. And they all lived very cush lives compared to everyone else. So they didn't want to lose their comfort and their stability as they saw it. But listen at this. They said they will take our place and our nation. The nation is already taken. I mean, they are a enslaved nation to Rome. They have Roman puppet leaders all over the countryside, and Rome has completely conquered them. There's no one under the disillusion that they're not. So what did they mean by our nation? Go ahead.
Would it be their system of belief and the rituals and the festivals and all the things that would not continue?
It is, yeah. That's a big, basically, yeah, and that's exactly what Jeannie asked. What was it? All the things that they got to do there, basically their lifestyles. The lifestyle, not only the lifestyle of their nation. See, they basically were kind of like the Israelites of old who said, you know, we had it really good in Egypt. You know, this is kind of what Israel was saying at this time. They were saying, you know what, you know, Rome is in charge. They take our money and from taxes, and they ultimately have power and all that control. But they don't hinder us from worshiping the way we want to worship. They let us use our own laws, except for when it comes to corporal or the death penalty. They won't let us do the death penalty, but they'll let us do everything else. So they said, we've got it pretty good. So they liked doing things the way that they were allowed to do them. But it seems like such an interesting thing. Now, I understand like the money and the power of like the richest people. But even if I lived a very comfortable life, I do live a very comfortable life, but even if I were like super rich and I saw a person performing miracles, even as much as raising a person from the dead, I think that I would say, well, I'm not going to pay attention to any of that because I don't want to lose my power and my money. It still blows my mind. I mean, I know it's probably not that strange, but it still blows my mind. Next, a prophecy. So first they had the gathering. Next they have a prophecy in the gathering, verses 49 and 50. But one of them, Caiaphas, you will be familiar with him through our studies of Matthew, high priest Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. And they also mentioned that year because the high priest was a position that you could theoretically hold for life. But there were different things that went into how long people had it and didn't have it. They didn't have term limits, I'll tell you that much. Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish." I thought it was interesting that he says, "You know nothing." But what he's getting at by saying "you know nothing" is they're all meeting, having this secret meeting, and the topic of discussion is, what can we do about Jesus? What can we do about this guy? We've got to figure out some way. And he basically says, stop. You guys don't know anything. Stop trying to devise a scheme. He's basically letting them know there is only one solution to someone like that. He's doing real miracles. He has real power. He has incredible influence. And the only way to deal with someone like that is death. Now, he uses this word expedient, which is an interest. I don't like the translation to the English. He says, "Nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people." This word expedient, you'll see that word there. I put the Greek word there, symphero. It is a verb. It literally means to bring together. Then I put like a symphony. It's where we get our word symphony. And everybody in unison, bringing everybody together in unison. So if we look at it like this, nor do you take into account that it will bring everyone together in unison, that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish. Why does he think that killing Jesus will unite all the people of the nation? Yeah.
It's division, but I wonder if there isn't, God doesn't have a hand in this. I mean, he's really prophesying what Jesus is going to do.
Yeah, he does. It is a real prophecy. Though I'll talk more about that in a minute, but it is a real prophecy even though he has no idea it's a real prophecy. Reminds me of when Saul prophesied in the Old Testament when he got caught up with all of those. He wandered into a bunch of priests that were all being filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesying, and Saul ended up prophesying as well, but that doesn't mean that he knew what he was saying or knew what he was doing at all. Just an interesting phenomenon. And it was a phenomenon of the high priest. The high priest was given prophecy, whether they were faithful or not, which is also a very interesting thing, I think. So, yeah, and in his mind, he thinks, well, we're divided over Jesus now. So if Jesus is gone, that'll solve the problem. Little bit of an oversimplification of the issue here. But he thinks that will bring the people together by his death. Now, one reason he may have thought that as well was because there had been people that had come before Jesus that claimed to be the Messiah. And after those people were killed, their uprising completely dissipated and just went away. So he's thinking probably as well, this guy's a phony. As soon as he's gone, things are going to play out. It reminds me of when Gamaliel comes to the defense of the apostles in Acts chapter 5. When Gamaliel says, "Hey, let's leave these guys alone, because if they're from God, we don't want to find ourselves fighting against God. But if they're not from God, it's not going to work out anyway. What they're trying to do isn't going to work out anyway." But Gamaliel was wiser than Caiaphas because he had the right thing in mind. Now, Caiaphas could have also had he had the wisdom of Gamaliel, he may have said as well, "Hey, if this guy really is from God, what are we trying to kill him for?" But this was all part of the plan. Like Sheila said, God will even use evil people in order to accomplish his will. But notice, as he's using them, he doesn't know that he's being used. He's being used in ignorance. Verses 51 and 52. "Now he did not say this on his own initiative, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad." An interesting thing, that he has this real prophecy, and he doesn't hold it back. He goes ahead and he tells it. But let's look at that a little closer. You can make anything that's good bad just by putting it in the wrong context. So he prophesies that Jesus is going to die for the good of the nation. What is his analysis regarding that? How does he interpret that word from the Lord?
Jesus is gone and out of the picture, it's better for their view of the nation.
Yeah, he thinks if Jesus is gone and out of the picture, that will be good for the nation. When he dies, that will be good for the nation. But he's thinking good in that he'll be out of our way and we can run things as we please, which is the wrong analysis, of course. He also prophesies that Jesus will die for other nations in order to bring God's children together. So what do you think his analysis was of that? Yeah, he probably just thought of Jews in other countries. Yeah, that's probably not too far off. But he definitely believed that, hey, the problem right now is Jesus. And we could be united, we could have unity if it weren't for him. If it weren't for him turning everybody, and the main thing, turning everybody against us, the religious leaders, when we get him to stop turning people against us, we can bring peace and unity to our nation, even those that are far off. So in his mind, he's thinking, we've just got to get this guy out of the way, and then everything will be good again. Things were never good. The true interpretation, Matthew 16:18. Jesus said to Peter, I will build my church. I will do it. I will build it, and it is mine. Of course, that word church, and the way that we use it, it's always good to remember that word church. Ecclesia means a public gathering in this sense, a public gathering of Jesus's people. That's what the word church means. That's why the main argument that I use to people that say, well, I think you can stay at home and still be the church. No, by the very definition of the biblical word church, you have to be with other Christians. I mean, it doesn't mean you're not a Christian, but you can't say, I had church today at home by myself, because the very definition of the word church is a public gathering of the Lord's people. You can worship by yourself, but you can't have church by yourself. Verse 53, so from that day on, they planned together to kill him. I said, okay, that's the solution. The solution is death. Then that's not the first time they've had that thought, but now they're going to put together an official plan, something I guess they hadn't done yet. So they planned together. What's so unusual about that? Well, first, who are they? When it says they planned together, who are they? The great Sanhedrin, yeah. So we're talking Pharisee, that's made up of Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, and they could have had one or two people that weren't one of those. But if they had a couple people in there that weren't a Pharisee, Sadducee, or a scribe, then they were very rich and very politically connected and very religious, okay? So it was a possibility to not, but probably not. They were probably all a Pharisee or a Sadducee or a scribe. Scribes are also referred to as lawyers or experts in the law. So that's who made up the great Sanhedrin. What's so unusual about that big group planning together? They didn't agree on anything. They didn't do anything together. But look at this great unity that they have together over an evil, only over an evil thing. The only time they would get together and agree with one another was over the death of Jesus. We don't agree with each other, but we agree on this. This guy has got to go. All the forces of evil in the world all came together in perfect harmony in order to do away with Jesus. It's interesting here. The religious leaders of Israel, the highest religious leaders of Israel, determined that murder is their righteous answer to this problem. Of course, they're going to have to figure out a way to justify it. They don't have that way yet. They haven't got it cemented in stone. They're going to make Jesus say who he is, and then they're going to call him a blasphemer and say that they have the right to kill him. Don't miss the point, though, of this incredible conclusion. No matter what happens, as long as people love their sin, Jesus will be either hated or denied. People that love their sin will either say Jesus doesn't exist, or they will conclude that he might exist, but they hate him, and they hate all of his followers. You've probably met people like that. I have. And finally, we have a withdrawal. That's one of those words. I hate that word, withdrawal. It's not meant for rednecks to say. verse 54, therefore Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness into a city called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. You know, the area wasn't far. It is north of Jerusalem and a little bit to the east. Is only about 12 miles away. So you think, well, that's not very safe to only go 12 miles away, but you can consider 12 miles without cars. It was undeveloped hill country, though. So it was a place that was not easy to get to. You know, you had to hike through the mountains to get to the place, and it was secluded. It was undeveloped, even by their standards of undeveloped. Neither crowds nor spies could easily assail that village. They could not get there easily, so no one could sneak up on them. They were in a very safe, secure location. Of course, Jesus is safe and secure no matter where he's at, but if he stayed in a place where people could get to him easily, he would end up having to do something that he didn't want to do, miraculously. And I love that it says he stayed with the disciples. Not the apostles, the disciples, because there's more than the apostles. He's got people that wanted to follow him, that he allowed to follow him. There's a whole mob of those people, men and women alike, that are following Jesus. And I added in there too that he will stay with us too. I think it's going to be one of the neatest things about heaven is that, and I think about it like this, I tend to think of heaven not in all these unrealistic terms and thoughts, but I think of heaven as similar to what we have here in the structure of kind of life in general. I mean, the Bible says we'll have bodies and we'll do stuff, we'll live in places and things like that. It gives all these we don't have too many things, but we do have some hints. I don't think it will be a whole bunch of meaninglessness, and I don't think it'll be a whole bunch of hedonism. But I do think we'll get to spend one-on-one quality time with Jesus. I think the Bible kind of indicates that. So I think that's a neat thought. To conclude, verses 55 and through 7. Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up to Jerusalem out of the country before the Passover to purify themselves. So they were seeking for Jesus and were saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think, that he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was to report it so that they might seize him. The last valid Old Testament Passover is what they've got coming, is what's coming up. The very last one. Now, I know people still celebrate the Passover today, but this was the last real one, the last real Passover, and the last one that they were commanded to still observe. Everyone after that has been observed has been completely meaningless. Seeking for Jesus. I found that wording to be interesting. It said, where's that at? Verse 56. So they were seeking for Jesus. Now that should be a positive note anytime you hear it, but it's one of the few times where you see a phrase like that. So they were seeking for Jesus, but it's completely evil. It's the wrong way to seek to Jesus. Seeking for Jesus the wrong way is a terrible thing. But I added here, we can be guilty too. How can we be guilty? Just give me one or two examples. How can we be guilty of seeking Jesus the wrong way? Yeah, for the approval of people around us, which, you know, by its definition, it's not really seeking Jesus at all. Or we may say the name Jesus, but the Jesus that we're seeking isn't the same one that we read about in the Bible. It's a Jesus of our own creation, or one that we have just, have dreamed up in our mind, or the way that we think Jesus should be. We are to seek the Jesus of the Bible. not adding or taking anything away from who the Bible says that he is. It's interesting that some people said, do you think that he will not come? He always came. He never missed. He never missed anything, especially for fear of people. But some of the people thought that because they knew that word would probably get to him, because he had lots of spies, that orders were given to report when he was seen so that he could be seized. They knew he was good at getting out of stuff, but they've got a plan, they've got the manpower, they are determined to do it. So, next week we will continue in this, entering into the last week of Jesus' life. We always offer an invitation for anyone who has a reason to respond. If you do, then feel free to come up to this front pew as we sing this song. If it's convenient for you, let's stand as we sing number 42. We're going to sing it twice through.